It was 8:45 a.m. when Julia first noticed him, a man in a sharp, tailored suit watching her from across the lobby. He didn't look like a client, a visitor, or even someone affiliated with Arcadia Enterprises, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that made her skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. Almost, knowing. He smiled briefly, a controlled, almost predatory smile, before stepping into the elevator and disappearing. Julia shook her head, trying to focus on her morning routine. She brushed past her apprehension, telling herself it was probably nothing, a coincidence. Yet the unease lingered. Arcadia Enterprises was a tech giant, renowned for innovation but feared for its ruthlessness. Careers were fragile, one misstep could destroy years of effort. Julia had spent 2 years navigating this environment, cautious, ambitious, and acutely aware of her own inexperience. The office was a maze of glass walls and polished steel. Fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow on gray carpeting. Conversations echoed faintly, and every glance seemed loaded with judgment. Julia's colleagues were strangers and allies in equal measure, each one performing a delicate dance of appearances, politeness, and silent competition. As she settled at her desk, Julia noticed subtle signs of intrusion, a sticky note that wasn't there the day before, a pen slightly moved from its usual place. She shook it off, blaming herself for being overly alert. But by Monday morning, it was impossible to ignore. Her inbox displayed an email she hadn't sent, addressed to a client she wasn't supposed to contact. Opening it, she saw that her carefully drafted content had been subtly altered, phrases changed, numbers highlighted as errors. Julia's pulse quickened. She spun around, half expecting someone to be watching her, but the office was empty. Her instincts screamed that this was intentional, that someone had been observing her closely. She decided to confide in Mark, a friendly colleague who had been a quiet anchor since her first week. She found him at the coffee machine, meticulously stirring his drink. "Mark, something's wrong. My email, it's changed. The date is, not mine," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Mark froze mid-stir. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, and a nervous twitch betrayed him. "Julia, maybe it's nothing. Maybe you misclicked." "No," she said firmly. "I triple-checked. This wasn't me. Someone's messing with my files." Mark swallowed hard, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. "Julia, just, be careful. Don't make waves. Things here aren't always what they seem." The ambiguity of his warning left her unsettled. Was he protecting her, or warning her? She didn't know, but the seed of fear had been planted. Later that day, as Julia navigated her department's glass corridors, she sensed the same presence again, the man from the lobby. He stood near the entrance, posture relaxed but precise, like a predator observing prey. Their eyes met, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. He didn't approach, didn't speak. He vanished before she could react, leaving a lingering sense of threat. The days that followed brought subtle but escalating acts of sabotage. Printers jammed at critical moments. Shared files vanished, only to reappear highlighting errors Julia hadn't made. Even her digital calendar became unreliable. Meeting times shifted without notice, and notifications appeared and disappeared without explanation. Colleagues' behavior added to her growing anxiety. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Others shot her glances full of caution, fear, or pity. Julia began overhearing whispered conversations. "I told her she shouldn't stay late. She's pushing herself too far, and they'll notice," a female colleague whispered, eyes darting toward Julia. The phrase, "they'll notice," hung in the air like a threat. Julia's mind raced. Who were they, and what had she gotten herself into? At night, sleep offered no relief. Dreams merged with reality. Endless glass-walled corridors, flickering lights, and the faceless figure of the man in the suit, always watching. She began to question her own sanity. Was she imagining things, or had someone orchestrated this elaborate game? One evening, while preparing a critical product pitch, Julia heard a faint rustling behind her. At first, she dismissed it as the vent, but then she noticed a small, folded note slipped under her keyboard. Hands trembling, she opened it. "You think you know who I am?" You don't. The handwriting was unfamiliar, deliberate, and unnervingly precise. The game had begun, and Julia knew she was the target. Determined to take control, Julia began testing her environment. She left minor errors in emails, misfiled documents, and subtly miscalculated numbers. She watched for reactions, shadows flickering in corners, unexplained sounds, subtle changes in colleagues' expressions. Someone was observing her, always one step ahead. Days turned into a psychological maze. Notes appeared in her workspace. Observe before you act. Your choices are being recorded. Each message amplified her paranoia. She became hyper-aware of every movement, every sound, and every interaction. The office that had once felt ordinary now felt like a trap, a controlled environment designed to manipulate her perception. By midweek, Julia knew she could no longer rely on instinct alone. She needed evidence. The subtle manipulations weren't random, they were calculated. Someone was observing her every move, learning her patterns, and exploiting them. Fear had evolved into a sharp, uneasy determination. She refused to be a pawn any longer. She began devising small traps to confirm her suspicions. An intentionally misplaced spreadsheet, a minor miscalculation in a report, or an email sent with subtle errors, each carefully planted to observe reactions. She monitored colleagues closely, watching for even the smallest tell, a flicker of surprise, a hesitation in speech, a glance toward the vents, or a barely audible footstep. Her workspace, once orderly and comforting, became her laboratory. Julia's desk was littered with notes, charts, and spreadsheets that served as bait. She carefully documented every anomaly. Which files disappeared, when the printer jammed, which emails were altered. Each incident became a data point in a growing web of suspicion and strategy. Mark, her colleague, noticed her newfound intensity. One afternoon, she found him lingering near the break room, pretending to scroll through his phone. "Mark, have you noticed anything strange?" she asked cautiously. "Files moving, emails being changed. Things that don't make sense." He froze for a moment, eyes flicking toward the ceiling, as if checking for unseen observers. Then he sighed, a mixture of hesitation and concern in his expression. "Julia, you're not imagining things. But you need to be careful. Some people here, they don't want you digging too deep." "Digging too deep. Mark, I'm not doing anything wrong. I just need to understand who's behind this." Mark looked away, as if weighing how much to reveal. "There are layers here you don't see. Patterns of surveillance, tests. It's not just about the files. It's about you, your reactions, how you handle pressure. Be smart." Julia's mind whirled. Tests, surveillance. The thought made her pulse quicken, but it also ignited a spark of resolve. If she was being observed, she would turn the game to her advantage. That evening, she worked late, reviewing the day's incidents. The office was quiet, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Julia noticed something peculiar, a shadow flickering at the edge of her vision, just beyond the reach of the desk lamp. She froze, straining her eyes, but saw nothing. Yet she could feel the presence, like someone watching, calculating, waiting. She decided to inspect the office more thoroughly. With careful precision, she moved through the corridors, checking corners, vents, and hidden spaces. Behind an air vent near her workstation, she discovered a small camera, its lens glinting faintly in the dim light. Her stomach tightened. Every keystroke, every movement, every document she handled had been monitored. She had been under surveillance the entire time. Panic surged briefly, but determination quickly replaced it. Julia would not be a passive participant in this psychological trap. She began refining her approach, experimenting with deliberate errors and false information, each designed to provoke a reaction. One experiment involved an intentionally misfiled financial report. She watched carefully as colleagues passed by, noting expressions, hesitation, and subtle glances toward the vents. Another test involved leaving a series of contradictory emails on the server, designed to see which ones were altered first. Each response told her something: how the observer operated, how quickly they acted, and which areas they monitored most closely. As days passed, Julia's understanding of her environment deepened. The office, once a familiar space, became a labyrinth of surveillance, strategy, and psychology. She learned to read subtle cues in people's behavior. A quick glance at a hidden camera, the way someone lingered by a desk, even the almost imperceptible way air moved when someone passed through a hallway. She began journaling obsessively, recording everything: times of incidents, locations, observed behaviors, and her own reactions. Each entry became a map of patterns, a guide through the invisible maze of observation and manipulation. Her mind, once scattered with fear and anxiety, sharpened. She began noticing small details she had overlooked: a paperclip slightly out of place, a note left intentionally, the faint whir of a printer when no one else was around. Every anomaly became a clue, every shadow a potential observer. Late one night, as she reviewed her notes, Julia realized the depth of the psychological test she had been enduring. She was being challenged not just to survive the manipulations, but to understand, adapt, and anticipate them. Each subtle sabotage, each altered email, each whisper in the hallways was a lesson in perception and patience. Julia's perspective shifted. She no longer approached the office with fear, she approached it as a strategist, a detective piecing together a puzzle. The psychological game was complex, but she was beginning to understand its rules. She was no longer a passive target, she was learning to turn observation into advantage. By the end of the week, Julia felt a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. The office had become a battlefield of perception, but she was no longer unarmed. She had evidence, patterns, and strategies. Most importantly, she had herself, the sharp instincts, keen awareness, and growing resilience that would allow her to confront whatever came next. The investigation had revealed more than surveillance. It had revealed Julia's own capacity to adapt under pressure. She realized that the ultimate challenge was not identifying the observer, it was mastering herself, understanding her environment, and turning fear into calculated action. And she was ready. Late one Friday night, after the office had emptied and the fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the glass walls, Julia returned to her desk. Her heart still raced from the day's subtle manipulations, the misfiled documents, the strange emails, the whispered warnings she could almost hear in her mind. As she adjusted her chair, a folded note slid silently under her keyboard. "Tonight, you will understand the rules." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise, deliberate, an almost surgical kind of precision that made her skin crawl. Fear and curiosity collided inside her. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run to the safety of the quiet streets outside, but something stronger urged her forward. This was the culmination of days of testing, of observation, of subtle psychological warfare. And she would not let it control her. Julia rose, glancing around the darkened office. The vast expanse of desks and glass-walled cubicles stretched silently into the shadows. Each corner, each reflection in the windows seemed to conceal unseen watchers. She had spent days training her eyes, her ears, her intuition. She had learned to notice the smallest shifts in light, the faintest movements in the corner of her vision. Every shadow became a clue, every sound a potential signal. Then she saw him. The man from the lobby, the predator who had haunted her thoughts for days, now stood at the far end of the hallway. His posture was calm, precise, as though he had been waiting for her, knowing she would follow. He gestured slightly, a subtle nod, and began walking toward the rear stairwell. Without hesitation, Julia followed. The office transformed as she moved deeper into its hidden recesses. The familiar corridors of glass and steel gave way to narrow passageways and stairwells she had never noticed. The air grew cooler, the fluorescent hum replaced by silence, punctuated only by the faint echo of her own footsteps. Each step brought a mix of apprehension and adrenaline, the thrill of fear and the drive to uncover the truth coursed through her veins. Julia's mind raced with questions. Who was this man, really? Was he merely an observer, or did he wield the full authority of the organization? Every manipulation she had endured, every note, every altered file, seemed to point toward a single purpose. But what was it? She had anticipated surveillance, but had she anticipated that the entire office could be a labyrinth of secrets? The man led her through a series of corridors that seemed to twist and fold impossibly. Doors that appeared ordinary concealed narrow staircases. A faint smell of polished wood mixed with the metallic tang of machinery. Hidden cameras, vents, and subtle audio sensors suggested that the office was far more than a workplace. It was a controlled environment, a stage for observation and psychological testing. Julia noticed small details she had never seen before. Faint scuff marks on the floor indicating frequent passage, barely noticeable hinges on panels revealing hidden compartments, subtle differences in lighting that suggested surveillance nodes. Her earlier experiences with misfiled documents and altered emails now made sense. Each anomaly was a breadcrumb leading her through this invisible maze. The man stopped at a massive, unmarked door at the far end of a narrow hallway. Its surface was dark, polished, featureless except for a small, almost imperceptible keycard reader. Without speaking, he held it open for her. Beyond it lay a lavish suite, dramatically different from the stark, clinical environment she had left behind. Warm light spilled across polished floors and elegant furniture, a sharp contrast to the cold fluorescent glow of the office. Julia stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. And there, seated behind a large, ornate desk, was the man himself, the real CEO of Arcadia Enterprises. The presence he radiated was commanding, yet calm, almost unnervingly so. His gaze met hers, unflinching, and Julia felt the weight of every observation, every test, every challenge she had endured converge in that moment. "You've been reckless," he said calmly, his voice measured and deliberate. "Not because you're incompetent, but because you failed to notice the details that matter. You didn't understand the human element." Julia's mind raced. You've been watching me this whole time?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. "Every error, every whisper, every altered file was a test," he explained. "I needed to see who could survive, who could adapt. Most fail, few succeed. You have adapted." Shock and awe collided within her. Every sleepless night, every trace of paranoia, every careful observation had led to this revelation. The psychological gauntlet, the emails, sabotaged files, whispers, and notes, had been meticulously designed, not to destroy her, but to teach her. She struggled to absorb the magnitude of it. The manipulations that had tormented her, the fears that had kept her awake, the sense of being constantly watched, it had all been deliberate. And she had endured, adapting to every test, learning to navigate the intricate maze of observation. The CEO leaned back slightly, hands folded. "You've earned more than a test. You've earned awareness, resilience, insight. Leadership is not about power, it's about perception, patience, and adaptability. You have proven all three." Julia's fear began to dissolve, replaced by a mixture of relief and awe. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had grown stronger, sharper, more aware than she had ever imagined. Every note, every shadow, every anomaly had become a lesson in vigilance, strategy, and self-mastery. As she processed this revelation, Julia realized the depth of her own transformation. She had entered this office as a competent, ambitious employee, but she had emerged as someone who understood the subtle dynamics of human behavior, the power of observation, and the necessity of adaptation. She could anticipate challenges, respond strategically, and maintain composure under intense psychological pressure. The CEO regarded her for a long moment, his gaze assessing. Most would have broken, most would have crumbled under the weight of uncertainty. But you have thrived. And now, you are ready, not just to survive, but to lead. Julia nodded, a sense of clarity and purpose settling over her. The office, once a place of fear and manipulation, now seemed like a classroom of invaluable lessons. The labyrinthine corridors, hidden cameras, and mysterious notes were no longer threats. They were catalysts for growth, for honing intuition, and for mastering oneself. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of control, of empowerment. The fear that had gripped her had been transformed into understanding. The unseen observer, the manipulations, the tests, they had all been a crucible, forging her into someone stronger, sharper, and wiser. As she left the suite, the office behind her seemed to shimmer with new meaning. No longer a place of silent threats and hidden eyes, it was a network of patterns, signals, and lessons waiting to be understood. Julia's journey through the maze of observation and manipulation had not only tested her, it had transformed her. She stepped into the hallway, heart steady, mind alert. The next steps, the next challenges, no longer intimidated her. She had learned the rules, adapted, and emerged stronger. And for the first time, she understood that true mastery was not about avoiding fear, it was about confronting it, understanding it, and using it to guide every decision. The CEO's words lingered in Julia's mind long after she had left the lavish suite. Leadership is not about power, it's about perception, patience, and adaptability. Each word resonated with clarity she had never experienced before. The office, once a battleground of paranoia and uncertainty, suddenly transformed in her mind into a classroom, a place where every interaction, every subtle cue, and every choice held meaning. She walked through the corridors she had once dreaded. The glass walls reflected not only her image but the faint echoes of lessons learned, the emails she had corrected, the files she had tracked, the subtle manipulations she had unraveled. Each moment of fear had become a stepping stone to understanding. She realized that survival alone was insufficient. True success required awareness, foresight, and the ability to anticipate both threats and opportunities. Weeks passed. The promotion came, not merely for technical skill or dedication, but for the quiet resilience she had demonstrated. Julia stepped into her new role with the confidence that came from having endured the unthinkable. She noticed the office differently now. Colleagues' expressions carried hidden cues, meetings held unspoken dynamics, and even minor procedural changes hinted at larger strategies. She became a mentor to newcomers, guiding them with empathy and strategic awareness. Julia taught them to read subtle patterns, to trust instincts, and to remain calm under pressure. The lessons she had learned from the mysterious manipulations became tools she could share, warnings disguised as guidance, experiences transformed into insight. And yet, the stranger, the man in the sharp suit who had guided her through the labyrinth, was gone. His presence lingered only in memory and in the lessons he had imparted. Julia understood that some trials are meant to be invisible, some teachers never seen. What mattered was the growth forged in the crucible of challenge. The revelation was simple but profound. Success is not granted, it is earned through observation, adaptation, and mastery of oneself. The office no longer felt like a cage, it was a canvas on which she could exercise judgment, skill, and influence. Julia had survived the tests, but more importantly, she had transformed herself into someone capable of thriving in any environment, however complex or manipulative. Julia's transformation extended beyond the walls of Arcadia Enterprises. Her perception sharpened, her intuition deepened, and her patience became a tool rather than a struggle. She approached work not as a sequence of tasks, but as a network of patterns, behaviors, and possibilities. She could anticipate the subtle moves of colleagues, detect hidden motives, and act with precision. Every challenge she faced, every altered email, vanished document, or whispered warning, had become a lesson in strategy, observation, and self-mastery. Fear, once crippling, was now a compass pointing toward growth. Uncertainty, once paralyzing, was now an opportunity to adapt and learn. Julia realized that the true measure of success lay not in avoiding difficulty but in mastering the ability to respond to it effectively. Her leadership style reflected the lessons learned. She guided her team with awareness and empathy, fostering an environment where observation, communication, and strategic thinking were valued. She taught newcomers to remain vigilant, to question anomalies, and to trust their instincts, all without cultivating paranoia. Her experience had shown her the delicate balance between awareness and overcaution. Even casual interactions carried new meaning. Julia noticed patterns in office politics, in unspoken alliances, and in the subtle signals of influence. Every glance, every hesitation, every note left unspoken was a puzzle piece she could now interpret. Where once she had felt trapped and vulnerable, she now felt empowered and capable. The lessons of the stranger, the hidden cameras, and the orchestrated manipulations were no longer threats, they were tools of insight. Julia had endured a gauntlet designed to test every facet of her mind and spirit. She emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Survival had become mastery. Julia reflected on her journey and understood that life often presents unseen challenges and invisible observers, testing resolve, perception, and adaptability. Some lessons come through fear, others through trial, all require the courage to endure and the wisdom to learn. She had embraced this, and it had transformed her. The office, once a maze of threats, was now a landscape of opportunity. Julia was no longer simply an employee, she was a strategist, a mentor, and a leader forged in fire. She had learned to transform fear into strength, uncertainty into insight, and challenge into growth. Every step forward was guided by the awareness and mastery she had earned. Julia smiled to herself as she passed through the corridors she had once dreaded. The lessons of the past weeks were hers to wield. The office was no longer a prison, it was a classroom, a proving ground, and now, a place where she could thrive. She was ready, for anything.